As Tari bravely follows the eerie shadows deep into the heart of the dark forest, she stumbles upon an ancient, glowing tree that holds the key to the village's terrifying secret. The whispers of the shadows grow louder, doom them all. With each step closer to uncovering the mystery, Tari faces unimaginable dangers that test her courage and determination. The chilling revelation that awaits her in the dark tunnel beneath the tree will leave her questioning everything she thought she knew. Will she have the strength to confront the shadowy forces before it's too late? Tari was a brave young girl with bright eyes and a kind heart. She lived in the small village of 𝗃𝗓𝗄, where everyone knew each other. The people of 𝗃𝗓𝗄 were good and hard-working, and they always helped one another. But something strange had been happening in the village. 4 weeks now, children had been disappearing. One by one, they vanished without a trace, leaving their families in tears. Tari had a secret. She could see things that no one else could see. At night, when the village was quiet and everyone was asleep, Tari would see shadows moving around the houses. These were not normal shadows. They were dark, tall, and looked like people, but they had no faces. The shadows seemed to glide silently from one place to another, as if searching for something. Tari had seen them near her window many times, and she knew they were not friendly. One night, as she was lying in bed, Tari saw a shadow standing outside her window. It was a small shadow, almost like a child. She watched as it moved closer to her friend 𝗃𝐨𝐺𝐵's house. The shadow reached out its dark hand and touched the door. Tari felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She wanted to scream, but her voice was stuck in her throat. The next morning, 𝗃𝐨𝐺𝐵 was gone. The village was in panic. The elders gathered everyone in the square and tried to calm them down. "We must stay together," the chief said. "The children will come back." But Tari knew that was not true. She knew the shadows had taken 𝗃𝐨𝐺𝐵, just like they had taken the others. She decided she had to do something. She couldn't just sit and wait while her friends disappeared. That night, Tari waited until everyone was asleep. She put on her slippers and grabbed her father's old lantern. She tiptoed out of the house, making sure not to make any noise. She was scared, but she knew she had to be brave. She had to find out where the shadows were taking the children. Tari reached the edge of the village and waited in the dark. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the trees. She saw the shadows again. They were moving quietly, gliding through the night like whispers. Tari followed them, keeping her distance. She didn't want them to see her. As she followed the shadows deeper into the forest, Tari felt the air grow colder. The trees were thick and tall, and the path was narrow. She could hear the sound of leaves crunching under her feet and the distant hoot of an owl. The shadows moved quickly, and Tari had to hurry to keep up. She was afraid of getting lost, but she kept going. She had to find her friends. After what felt like hours, the shadows stopped in front of a big, old tree. Its trunk was thick, and its branches twisted like long fingers reaching up to the sky. The shadows gathered around the tree and began to whisper in a language Tari didn't understand. She hid behind a bush and watched carefully. Suddenly, the tree began to glow with a soft blue light. The shadows started to disappear, one by one, into the tree. Tari gasped. She knew she had found the place where the children were being taken, but she didn't know how to get inside. She waited for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, she saw a shadow turn and look in her direction. Tari ducked down quickly, holding her breath. Had it seen her? The shadow stared for a moment, then turned back to the tree and vanished into the blue light. When the last shadow was gone, Tari stood up slowly. She walked towards the tree, her hands shaking. She reached out and touched the trunk. It was cold and smooth, like ice. As she pressed her hand against it, the blue light began to glow brighter. She heard a soft whisper in her ear, but she couldn't understand what it was saying. Tari took a deep breath and stepped closer. She had to be brave. She had to find the children. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The tree opened up, revealing a dark tunnel inside. Tari felt a cold wind blow through her hair, and she knew she had to go in. She looked back at the village one last time, then stepped into the tunnel. The darkness swallowed her, and the entrance closed behind her. Inside the tunnel, it was cold and quiet. Tari could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She held the lantern up, its light flickering in the darkness. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to move when she looked at them. She could feel the shadows watching her, even though she couldn't see them. As she walked deeper into the tunnel, she heard a faint sound. It was a soft crying, like the sound of a child. Tari's heart raced. Was it one of the missing children? She hurried towards the sound, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. The crying grew louder, and she saw a small figure sitting in the corner. It was 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿. 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿. Tari whispered. "It's me, Tari. I'm here to help you." 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿 looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "Tari, you have to go," he cried. "They will take you too." But Tari shook her head. "I'm not leaving without you," she said firmly. She reached out her hand, but before she could touch him, a shadow appeared between them. The shadow was tall and dark, its eyes glowing red. "You should not be here," it hissed. Tari felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground. "I want my friends back," she said bravely. The shadow laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "They belong to us now," it whispered. "You cannot take them." Tari knew she had to do something fast. She remembered the blue light from the tree and wondered if it could help. She held up her lantern and said, "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow hesitated for a moment, then lunged at her with its long, dark arms. Tari closed her eyes and swung the lantern, the light flaring brightly. The shadow screamed and vanished into the air. 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿 grabbed Tari's hand, and they started to run. They ran through the dark tunnel, their feet pounding against the ground. Behind them, they could hear the shadows whispering, getting closer and closer. Tari felt her heart beating fast, but she knew they had to keep going. She had to find a way out. They reached a fork in the tunnel, and Tari didn't know which way to go. She took a deep breath and chose the left path, hoping it would lead them back to the tree. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and the air grew colder with every step. Tari could feel the shadows closing in behind them. She could hear their whispers getting louder. Finally, they saw a faint light ahead. Tari felt a surge of hope. "We're almost there," she cried. But just as they reached the light, a huge shadow blocked their path. It was bigger than any shadow she had seen before, and its eyes were bright with anger. "You cannot leave," it growled. "The children are ours." Tari felt her legs shaking, but she knew she couldn't give up. She squeezed 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿's hand and said, "We have to fight." 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿 nodded, his eyes wide with fear, but he was ready. They raised the lantern together, the light shining brightly. The big shadow roared and lunged at them, its dark arms reaching out. Tari and 𝗁𝗕𝐾𝐿 swung the lantern with all their strength. The light flared even brighter, and the shadow screamed in pain. It began to shrink, its dark form twisting and turning. Tari could feel the cold wind blowing around them, but she held on tight. She knew they had to be brave. They had to fight for their friends. Finally, the big shadow vanished, leaving nothing but a faint mist in the air. Tari and 𝗁𝗁𝐾𝐿 stood there, breathing heavily. They had done it. They had defeated the shadow. But they knew they were not safe yet. They had to find the way out and bring the other children with them. They turned and saw a small doorway at the end of the tunnel. Tari felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was the way out. She and 𝗁𝗁𝐾𝐿 ran towards the door, their hearts pounding with excitement.